lesson, we are going to discuss the mechanism of breathing. You know how inhalation and exhalation takes place. Now, before we start, I want to give a little bit of an explanation that will make the following information easier for you to digest. Number one is with regards to the changes in volume and pressure. Now, breathing is accompanied by changes in the volume and air pressure of the thoracic cavity. This simply means that you're going to be having the volume and the air pressure of the thoracic cavity changing in inhalation and exhalation. Now, volume and pressure have an inverse relationship. This simply means that whenever you hear that volume has increased, then know that automatically the pressure has decreased and vice versa. Now, another thing has to do with the intercostal muscles. So, as mentioned in part 1 of our video, intercostal muscles are muscles that are attached to the surfaces of ribs. So the contraction and relaxation of these muscles lead to changes in the volume of the thoracic cavity. So they're very important. Now, intercostal muscles come in a pair. We have the external intercostal muscles and the internal intercostal muscles. Now, some muscles come in pairs and they're usually antagonistic. So antagonistic simply means that when you have one muscle contracting, the other is going to relax. And this is the case with the intercostal muscles. So whenever you see external intercostal muscles contracting, then definitely know that the internal intercostal muscles are relaxing and vice versa. One last thing, the diaphragm. So what is the diaphragm? Now, the diaphragm is a tissue, of course, that consists of muscles. So it's capable of also expanding and contracting. Now, the normal shape of the diaphragm is dome-shaped as such. So what happens is that when the muscles of the diaphragm relax, it assumes its normal shape, which is dome-shaped. But when the muscles of the diaphragm contract, it flattens the diaphragm. So I believe we're now ready to start discussing the actual steps that take place during inhalation and exhalation. So I'm going to place the information in a table as such. Number one, you're going to have the external intercostal muscles contracting. What did we say will happen to the internal intercostal muscles? They will relax. So this causes the rib cage to move upwards and outwards, as you can clearly see. Next has to do with the diaphragm. So the diaphragm muscles contract, and by contracting, they cause the diaphragm to flatten. Now, I want you to look at the thoracic cavity right now. This is how it was initially. This is how it is right now. Notice the changes in volume. So the volume of the thoracic cavity increases. If the volume increases, what happens to the pressure class? It decreases. So the air pressure inside the thoracic cavity decreases. Now, if you have a difference in the air pressure inside and outside, nature will seek to equalize it. So when the air pressure inside the thoracic cavity decreases, air is going to rush into the lungs through the nose. This causes the lungs to inflate. So exhalation, number one, you're going to have the external intercostal muscles relaxing this time, while the internal intercostal muscles contract. Number two, what will happen to the rib cage? It's going to move downwards and inwards. What about the diaphragm? The muscles of the diaphragm are going to relax, and when they do so, the diaphragm is going to assume its normal dome shape. So look at this. What has happened now to the volume? It has decreased. So the volume of the thoracic cavity has decreased, which will cause the pressure inside to increase. Now, if you have a higher air pressure inside the thoracic cavity than outside, that means it needs to be lowered. How? By forcing air out of the lungs and into the atmosphere. This, of course, happens through the nose, and the lungs deflate. Now, guys, I want to say this. If you manage to master the steps in inhalation, there's no need for you to cram what happens in exhalation. Just simply know that the reverse, the exact opposite of it, is what happens in exhalation, as you can clearly see from this information when placed side by side. Now, our last bit. How does the exchange of gases occur in the alveoli? Now, as mentioned before, the alveoli have a very thin epithelium covering them. Number two, they are highly vascularized. They have a lot of blood capillaries surrounding them. And number three is that they are also surrounded by a thin film of moisture, a little bit of water. Now, this is for dissolving the gases. Now, what happens is that when air is inhaled, it then passes into the alveoli. The oxygen that is present in the air then dissolves in the film of moisture and then diffuses. After this, it diffuses. Now, before diffusion takes place, we need to have a concentration gradient. So, diffusion can never take place if you don't have a concentration gradient. If you have two regions that have the same concentration, for example, of oxygen, diffusion does not take place. So, you need to have two regions, with one region having a higher concentration of oxygen and the other region having a lower concentration of oxygen. In this case, the alveoli are going to have a high concentration of oxygen because this is present in the air that just came in from the atmosphere. Now, in the blood present within the capillaries, you're also going to have oxygen, but at lower concentration. Little of it is present. So, as such, we have a concentration gradient. And if we have a concentration gradient, what happens next? Diffusion. So, oxygen then passes across the thin epithelium of the alveoli and into the blood capillaries. So, when it reaches the blood capillaries, what happens is that it combines with hemoglobin present in the red blood cells to form oxyhemoglobin. This, of course, is then transported to the body tissues. What about carbon dioxide? Remember, when you talk about gaseous exchange, we are talking about both gases. So in this case, you're going to have carbon dioxide being at a high concentration in the blood. Why? Because this is carbon dioxide that has been taken in from the tissues. Tissues carry out respiration, and when they carry out respiration, they produce carbon dioxide as a waste product. So carbon dioxide concentration in the blood capillaries is going to be higher than in the alveoli. So it's going to diffuse out. So it's going to diffuse out and into the alveoli, where it's then simply exhaled out. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how gaseous exchange takes place in mammals.